the rage right now is these full body splits, these push-pull leg splits, which I happen to love, by the way. And there's not a lot of people that just train their arms by themselves anymore. That's called a bro split. Apparently it's wrong. You should never do that. If you're having a problem with your biceps, the first thing I want to tell you, I would suggest that you dedicate a specific day for them. So if you're doing a push-pull leg split, you could do push-pull legs and then arms, and then take a day off and start the rotation over. The first thing I would do is don't rely on the push-pull or full body workouts to give you maximum development of your arms. One of the first things that comes to my mind as well, it's how heavy do you train your biceps? You know, we all believe in progressive overload and trying to get a little bit stronger, but there's something about your biceps, you got to be careful. If you're going real heavy all the time, there's a very high likelihood that you'll get tendonitis in your elbows. And I bet a high percentage of you watching this video have probably had some kind of elbow issues in the past. Golfer or tennis elbow, you've probably had some of that. And what I've noticed through the years, when I used to do the real heavy curls, I think I used to do 190 pound curls with a barbell, 70, 80 pound curls with a dumbbell. Sure, my biceps looked like they were moving a lot of weight. I was using a lot of cheating, doing whatever I could, using a lot of weight, and I pretty much just had tendonitis all the time and my arms wouldn't grow. And then I'd lighten the weight up, all of a sudden my biceps are growing. You know, I was probably actually making the biceps actually use more weight because I wasn't cheating, but I think in order to get maximum bicep development, it's a unique muscle. I think that muscle, you have to be very cautious with going real heavy. You gotta be very cautious. So what I'm gonna advocate is more of a moderate weight. Instead of the ultra heavy barbell curls, I'm gonna advocate that you go a little bit lighter. I didn't say light, I said not ultra heavy, and use strict form, which we're gonna get into. In your mind, I want you to think my form and my contractions are number one, not the heavy weight I'm slinging around. That's a very broad and general and vague statement, but it's really, really important on biceps in my opinion. And I absolutely got the best gains in my bicep when I did that. Let's talk about intensity, failure. Do you go to failure? Do you not go to failure? Again, I think it's common sense, something the bodybuilders have known for decades as well. But if you're going to go with moderate weights, not real heavy weights, now you're going to have to do more stuff to failure. It's not going to be good to get a moderate weight and just do some pumping, leave a bunch of reps in the tank and do it again, particularly for those of you that are natural. That's not going to create much in terms of adaptation to make your biceps bigger. Since we're going with a little bit more moderate weight, we're going to have to take more sets to failure. To really exhaust the fibers, we're probably going to want to throw in some high intensity techniques. So the way I would structure this into a program, like normally, let's say I'm training chest. Let's say I pick 3 or 4 exercises. Normally what I'll do is I'll work up to a real hard and heavy set, the last set, go to failure, and then maybe on 2 of those 4 sets, I'll go beyond failure. So, you know, we get 4 sets that are really, really hard, and then maybe 2 or 3 that are decent, session. Well, with biceps, it's going to be a little different. I'm generally going to pick 3 exercises. And I'm probably going to do about 3 sets per exercise, but they're all going to be to failure pretty much. So it's going to be 9 sets to failure. That sounds like a lot, and it is, but again, we're using lighter weights. If we were doing something real, real heavy, we wouldn't do that many sets to failure. Again, I don't want you trying to set world records on your barbell curls because I want your elbows to be healthy. So many people who just can't train their arms right because their elbows are messed up. The notion there is, since you're not going real heavy, when you're using a little bit lighter weight, the lighter the weight is, I believe the more you have to go to failure. I want to talk about form. On the other videos we've been doing, we've been really focused on basic exercises because I know not everybody has access to a lot of the machines I use. So I'm trying to keep these simple. What could be more simple than a barbell curl? So I want to start there on form because I also think there's a lot of technique issues that for some of you is probably pretty obvious, but for some of you it's probably not. So we're going to start with a regular barbell curl. One of the reasons why your arms aren't growing is when you curl, you're doing a hip thrust, right? So let me show you what I mean. And I see this a lot. So you'll have somebody get the weight going with their hip, right? So when they do that, the tension doesn't even start until they're halfway through the motion, right there. There's no tension from here to here. If you want to go to failure with good form and then actually throw in a couple cheat curls, I'm okay with that. But that's not what I see. What I see is people doing all their reps like that in an effort to go really heavy. Bye-bye tendons and ligaments. Your tendons, you're going to have a lot of inflammation. So how should you curl? I think there's a couple ways to curl. You've got the standard, keep your elbows stationary, and curl like this, right there. There's nothing wrong with that. Then you've got a little bit of a different style up here all the way. Now the second style, I see people all the time saying that's wrong. It's actually not wrong. Your long head contributes a little bit to shoulder flexion. I'm not saying you're going to get massive biceps if you just stand there doing this. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is when you get up to here and you give it a little bit more shoulder flexion, it actually works the long head of your bicep a little more. a little bit more here on the outside. Listen, just try it. Just sit there. I want you to do this. Flex your arm. Now I want you to do this. And you'll actually feel the tension. You'll feel it. It's real good here. And then bam, it's even harder. So I see a lot of people curling with a swing like that. And again, there's no tension at the bottom. Instead of curling, they're throwing the weight up. What I want you to do is I want you to keep your elbow pinned against your side when you start. The other thing people do is they don't know it, but they're training their brachioradialis, this muscle right here. They're training that more instead of their bicep. That muscle helps you when you're kind of in that neutral or pronated position like this. Instead of supinating early and using your bicep, they're doing this all the way up and then they're doing a little twist at the end. That doesn't do a whole lot. That's okay if you want to just train your brachioradialis. I mean, what people tell me is I just feel my forearms. I don't feel my biceps. And then when I watch their form, I see them doing that. I'm like, well, no wonder. You're actually training like you're trying to train your brachioradialis. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to supinate very early in the movement at the bottom third, okay? So I want you to supinate down here. I don't want you to come up here and then just do a little supination like that. Now, there's a third little trick to these too. People get the heavy weight up and they'll drop the weight down. So they just drop it down. You got a great opportunity to eccentrically contract. So use a good negative when you lower it. Supinate at the 1/3 position at the bottom, around there. Now really put a lot of emphasis on the negative. And I just see people paying no attention to the negative. They're coming up and then they're just dropping it. If you do just those 3 things on your dumbbell curls, they're going to feel a million times better. Is they don't train your brachialis. Your brachialis is a muscle that sits underneath your bicep, right about right there. When that muscle develops, it pushes your bicep up. So when people say, well, I want to get a wider arm, training that muscle will help you do that. I'm pretty lucky because growing up in bodybuilding, I was always taught that. Like, you got to develop your brachialis. So that's always been a part of my arm routine. But I don't see people doing a lot of hammer stuff anymore. And I think every bicep workout you do, you should include brachialis work. Reverse curl, whether it's a hammer curl. I personally love hammer curls. By the way, that brachialis is an incredibly powerful elbow flexor. It's actually even stronger than your biceps. Make sure that in your bicep routine, you're training your brachialis. So you can do it here. You can do it here, the easy bar with a pronated grip like that. I personally like the hammer curl better. It is a big miss if you don't train that brachialis. When you're doing your preacher curl, I see a lot of people doing this. Okay, so they got a low curl at the top, but I see them starting it like this. I want you to just sit back, curl strict. So none of this, okay? I know that sounds simple, and you probably already knew that. Man, I see a lot of people doing that on their preacher curls. And that is a beautiful bicep exercise. Make sure you kill the momentum on these. The other thing is, you don't necessarily need to go down all the way on these. It can be really hard on your connective tissue at the bottom of your bicep too. Go down about 4/5 of the way before you come back up. These are gonna work the bottom part, though. That bottom part is very tough. So the other thing that's important on these is where you actually put the pad. I like to see your arm on the pad like this. So what I've done is I've set the pad too low. Now, if you get the pad too low, look at where my elbows are. It's not terrible, but I don't think you're getting the most out of it. I'd rather see your arm down like this. There are some exercises that are harder at the beginning, and there are some exercises that are harder at the end. An incline dumbbell curl, so you're sitting on a bench in an incline position with your shoulders extended this way. The beginning of the motion is harder. Some exercises are harder in the middle, like a barbell curl. And then there's some exercises that are harder at the end part of the contraction, like a spider curl. Over there on a preacher bench, flat pad with your arms hanging down. One thing that people do a lot is they use their exercise selection is they pick exercises that stress the same, the beginning or the middle or the end. That's all their exercise selection. So they miss really maximally stimulating their muscle through one of those parts of the range of motion. So if you do, for example, all barbell curls and all dumbbell curls, you're probably missing a lot at the bottom or that fully contracted bicep at the top. What I'd like for you to do is when I think of biceps, I think basically you want to pick out 3 exercises, maybe 4, but generally 3. When you see people doing 6, 7, 8 exercises for biceps, there's no way they can be training with a lot of intensity. You can't do set after set after set, 6 to 8 exercises at that high level of intensity. You can't do that. What I want you to do is I want you to pick an exercise that works more the middle to start with. That could be a barbell curl. That could be a supinated dumbbell curl. That could even be a hammer curl. So pick one of those 3. Normally I'm going to pick a hammer curl. Your next exercise is going to be something that stresses the contraction. Okay, so one option you have for working the contracted part at the top is a spider curl, and I love these. Notice the pad is flat right here. So now you can get up into the top and really contract. That's one option I really like. Another way to work that contracted part, set a cable up so you're pulling from a low angle. Now you're going to pull not just to here, all the way up. Here's another. this way. You could use a curl bar on this too. I actually smash the dumbbells together when I do these. What I like to do, ideally by this point, is have a crazy pump in my biceps. That's when you hit them with the stretch exercise. That's when you would do something like this. You remember when I said that these work the bottom part of the range of motion the most? So now we're working the bottom part of the range of motion. And it's giving you a stretch. So see the stretch I've got right here? Very hard at the bottom. Another option would be that basic preacher curl that we did. So there is a subtle change in technique that you can use to help lessen the forearm work so you get more in your biceps. And it's real simple. Instead of gripping like this, you just let the weight kind of hang. Instead of curling like this, I'm going to let it hang. Now there are two exercises that I would use this for. One is a drag curl. That's when you're dragging right up your body like this. And the other would be just a normal cable curl here on the machine. So if I had one of the little handles, I would do the same thing. I don't like doing all your exercises like this for biceps. I don't like trying to do it with dumbbells and all the different preacher curls. I think that change in grip, it's good for isolating biceps, but you got to be careful with it though. I don't like the feeling that it puts on your wrist in some exercises. The way you grip the bar is also very important in how much stress you put on your biceps. It's a unique concept. Use these grip things called grip force. And the theory behind those was you have to squeeze the entire time you're doing the curl. Like those little grippers would actually, the bar would come out of there if you didn't keep it closed. The principle behind that was called muscle irradiation. Theoretically, when you're squeezing something really hard, you can get more muscle contraction. Now, it's not just in your bicep, it's everywhere. When I was over at Westside Barbell in the mid-90s, they talked about that. To get maximal contraction in all the muscles you could, when you bench press, for example, you squeeze the bar. You didn't just grab in your hands and press, you actually squeeze the bar when you're doing biceps. Now, this is, I don't want to say it's the opposite of what I just said, but it's a different technique. So you can actually squeeze the bar real hard, and you theoretically get more muscle activation. Now, it's going to be more in your forearms too. It's going to be more in your forearms, more in your biceps, just because of that muscle radiation. So you're squeezing the bar. I like for my forearms to get engaged too, because I think if you have weak forearms, it really limits your bicep development actually. I would only do one of these per exercise. You do say three exercises, 3 sets. Well, only on the 3rd set would I use a high intensity technique. Partial as a high intensity technique. So let's say you're doing dumbbell curls. Let's say I can't do anymore. Let's say this is my eighth and final rep, but I can still do partials. Keep it going, keep the reps going. You can do that with a barbell too. That'll light up your biceps. ISO hold. So let's say you're doing single arm. Let's say you do your 8 reps. Can't do anymore, you get failure. So now you do an ISO hold. On your 8th rep, you come up and then you hold right here and count to 10. And if you want to make it real hard, have your training partner push down on your hand too. Or you can do a drop set. So you get 8, you go to failure, then you drop it 10 pounds and you keep going. My point is to take a couple sets of your workout and use the high intensity technique. And this is why I don't really like cheating on exercises. You don't need to cheat. You have so many different options. You could just lower the weight and keep your form strict and get the same thing without tearing your body up. Or you could just do partials. You could do things like this that I think will tax the muscle even more and do it more safely. I mean, do you want to cheat a little bit? Yeah, I guess you can, but no one can convince me that you have to when you have all these different options available. All right, so we've talked about exercise selections, volume, intensity, angles. We've talked about everything. I want to throw one more out at you, and it's a really old school technique. It's just flexing your arms. So you'll notice, remember the old school bodybuilders, like in the movie Pumping Iron, in between sets, like if they're training their chest, they'll flex their chest. If they're training biceps, they'll flex their biceps. It's actually good. It develops your mind-muscle connection. In between your sets of biceps, don't be afraid to just kind of flex your bicep. That's okay. And even when you're not in a gym, when you're just sitting at home, maybe not when you're walking down the street, but when you're sitting at home, it's okay. Just sit there and flex. Try to really develop that mind-muscle connection to where you can feel a hard contraction. Do that in between your sets too. It's going to get more blood in the muscle, but again, the goal of that is mind-muscle connection. The better your mind-muscle connection is, the better your results will always be.